Assalamu alaikum. I am Amina Haider, lecturer, Institute of Business Studies. I am here with the screencast of Introduction to Business course. This is lecture number 14, and the topic that we are going to discuss today is the difference among partnership form of business, private companies and public companies. Let's move towards the topics. These are the topics that we are going to cover in our today's lecture. So first we discuss the objective of today's lecture. Through this lecture we would have a better know-how of different feature on the basis of which we can differentiate partnership form of business, the private companies and public companies. So moving towards the topics. Incorporation. The first feature is that of incorporation. Partnership form of business is registered under the Partnership Act 1932. Private companies and public companies are registered under the Company Ordinance 1984. So all the clauses related with the partnership form of business is in the form of an act, which is Partnership Act 1932, and all the clauses and all the features of company form of business is in the Company Ordinance 1984. Like in the previous lecture, we discussed that a joint stock company is a voluntary association of person which is registered under the Ordinance of 1984 and formed for the purpose of any common objective. But a partnership form of business is the relation between two or more individuals who actually agree to share the profits of a business carried on by all or any of them acting for all. The partners are collectively called as firms. So moving towards the next feature. Members. In case of partnership form of business, at least two partners must be there, and they can have a maximum of 20 people. A private company can have minimum of 2 members, and they can have a maximum of 50 members. On the other hand, a public company can have a minimum of 7 members, and there is no upper limit. They can have as many members as possible, so there is no maximum limitation in case of public companies. The next feature is that of legal entity. In partnership, there is no legal formality required. In private companies and in public companies, legal formality is necessary to fulfill. If anybody wants to start a partnership form of business, like we said, there is no legal formality required for that. You just need a partnership deed which is uh, which is the required document for the partnership form of business. Partnership deed is actually the partnership agreement that is conducted between the partners, in which all the issues are discussed, on the basis of which they are going to run the partnership form of business. Whereas a private company and a public company is a is a corporate body, and legal person have a corporate personality which is distinct from its members. The members are actually not liable for the acts of the company. But when we talk about the partnership form of business, partnership has no legal existence which is distinct from its members. So, partners are liable for the acts of the firm. Liability. Partnership form of business, the liability of its member is unlimited, whereas in case of private company and public companies, the liability of its member is limited. So the maximum liability of the shareholder in case of a public company, the liability of the shareholder will be up to the amount that is actually invested in the company form of organization. But in case of partnership form of business, the liability of the partners is unlimited. The partners are jointly and severally liable for all the debts of the partnership firm. So they are responsible for themselves, and they are responsible for their partners in case of partnership form of business. And if they are not able to pay their liability through business asset, their personal assets are going to be used for returning back the debts that they actually obtained. Capital. In case of a partnership form of business, the capital is usually raised through the partners involved. So the amount of capital which is generated is usually limited, because the number of member in its the number of member in partnership form of business is limited. So usually the amount of capital is mainly subscribed by the partners. So you can collect only limited amount of capital in case of partnership form of business. Whereas in case of private companies, it raises all the capital by private arrangement. They are also not allowed to invite public to buy its shares by the issuance of prospectus. So here also usually the capital is contributed by all the shareholders or all the members that are involved in it, since it's a private arrangement. Whereas in case of public companies, they like we said, they allow they invite the general public for the generation of its for the formation of its capital. So maximum amount of capital is collected in case of public companies, since the members are not limited. So here maximum amount of capital is generated. The public is allowed to buy its share by the issuance of prospectus also. The next feature is that of listing on stock exchanges. In case of partnership form of business and private companies, the shares are not listed on stock exchanges. Stock exchange is actually the place where, like in the market, we buy and sell goods in the market. So that is the platform. So the platform that is used and provided for buying and sharing of shares is the stock exchanges. So, since in case of partnership form of business and private companies, here the number of members are limited and they do not invite general public for their business. So in case of partnership and private companies, they do not list their shares on stock exchanges. They do not feel the need to place their shares on stock exchanges. But in case of public companies, since they want to invite the general public, because the more the public get attracted towards the share, the more capital would be raised through it. So they want to place their uh, shares on stock exchanges so that maximum people get awareness about their shares, and through stock exchanges they buy and sell their shares. So public companies list their shares on stock exchanges, whereas private and partnership form of business do not list their shares on stock exchanges. The next feature is that of management. In case of partnership form of business, like I displayed, that every partner has the right to take part in management. So here the Partnership Act 1932 gives all the members the right to take part in management affairs. But if a partner willingly withdraw himself from the management, he can. So all the partners that are working on the behalf of rest of the partners can carry out the management affairs. They work in absolute sincerity. They give personal attention to the customer, and this actually strengthens the customer and the firm relationship. In case of private companies and in case of public companies, the day-to-day affairs are actually run by the directors. In case of private companies, at least two directors must be there to carry out the management affairs, whereas in case of public companies, at least seven directors must be there to carry out the management affairs. These board of directors are elected by the shareholders who are responsible for running the management affairs. So at least in case of public companies, seven board of directors must be there, and in case of private companies, two directors must be there to run the affairs of management. Transfer of shares. In case of partnership form of business, partners are not allowed to transfer their shares to one another without taking the consent of other partners. So, whenever they want to transfer their shares or they want to withdraw their shares from the partnership form of business, they have to take the consent from their partners. And if the partners allowed, they can transfer their shares, and if they do not agree on it, they are not allowed to transfer it or withdraw their share. Here in partnership form of business, we call it a frozen investment, because you have to take the consent of the partners before withdrawing or before transferring your share to other partners. In case of private companies, it is restricted by articles. Private companies also, in partnership form of business and in private companies, the transfer of share is restricted. You cannot transfer your shares to other members in case of private companies as well. But in case of public companies, shareholders are allowed to transfer their shares without the consent of the other partners. Like we said in our very first lecture, that it is a voluntary association. So if a partner if a shareholder want to transfer his shares to any other shareholder, he can. You don't have to take consent from the other members or shareholders. So shares of a company are freely transferable in case of a company form of organization, but a partner cannot transfer his share without the consent of the partners. And in private companies also, you cannot transfer your shares freely. In case of partnership form of business, it is not a legal necessity for the partners to keep books of account. But generally, they do maintain books of accounts for their own easiness. And these books of accounts are not audited also, but they maintain it for their own easiness and for their own uh, uh, I don't find the right word for it. For their own easiness, they do maintain the books of accounts. Whereas in case of private companies and public companies, they properly maintain their books of accounts. They are properly maintained and they are audited, and they are audited by qualified auditors who are appointed by the shareholders. Uh, so books of account maintenance is necessary in case of private companies and in case of public companies. Powers. The partners can operate any lawful business as mutually agreed, as it is mentioned in the partnership deed, or which we call partnership agreement. Whereas in case of private companies and in case of public companies, the power of directors is only confined to the object clause of the memorandum of association. You cannot use the capital uh, for any other purpose other than the one that is mentioned in the object clause of memorandum of association. Commencement business. The partners can start business as per agreement. Once the partnership deed is fulfilled, they can start their business. They don't have to fulfill any other legal formalities. Whereas in case of private companies, they have to follow certain legal procedures, they have to fulfill certain legal procedures, uh, and they have to submit certain essential documents. When they receive the certificate of incorporation, that is when they are allowed to start their business formally. So the required document for commencement of private companies is certificate of incorporation, whereas in case of public companies there are two documents necessary uh, to have before starting their business and before floating their shares into the market. The two essential certificates are certificate of incorporation and certificate of commencement. Statutory meeting. Statutory meeting is the legal meeting. In case of partnership, you don't need to conduct that meeting. This meeting is actually conducted in the first 6 months of starting the business. So in case of partnership form of business, there is no legal compulsion. In private companies, there is no legal compulsion to conduct the statutory meeting. But in case of public companies, it is the required entity to conduct the statutory meeting. For that, you have to make a statutory report and you have to send it to the shareholders. And you have to conduct it between 3 to 6 months. And if you don't conduct that meeting, legal action can be taken against the company. So it is an essential meeting to be conducted for the public companies. That's it for today. This is the reference book that I followed for today's lecture. Thank you.